One of the things I get asked about constantly is my big old fancy Cubase template, how I made it, what went into the decisions that I made while I was building it. Some of the logistics of how it's set up and just sort of the overall philosophy. And it's a really interesting question because when it comes to templates, they can be kind of a contentious or at least a very passionate topic for composers. There are a lot of different ways you can build a template. There's a lot of different philosophies you could employ when you're thinking about how you want to design one. Do you want a template that is sleek and efficient, that simply gets you to the most used things very quickly and then leaves some freedom outside of that to do things more specific from project to project? Do you want to actually build a template that's specifically for a project and have it be different than a template for another project? Do you want to build, in the case of my template, a template that's just a massive behemoth that contains absolutely everything you could ever need so that you spend less time looking for stuff? All three of these options, and probably more that I haven't thought of, are totally valid when you're building your template. But I'm just going to go into depth a little bit today on what I did and why I built it the way that I built mine. This is not saying this is the way you should do it. You should absolutely think about it for yourself, because at the end of the day, a template is something that is very personal, and you want to do what feels best and works best for you. Your workflow might be different than mine, but it is helpful to see just what other people do, and I've been asked about mine so much. So I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty on this, and we're going to see how I set it up and how I've incorporated everything that you see here around me and how I use it. So let's dive in. All right, so when I open up a new project, this is what you see. It's important to me that when I open up my template, it's not overwhelming. I don't want to see all 2,954 tracks. So I have things in folders, I have things collapsed, and everything's there ready for me to access, but it's not necessarily just assaulting me as I open it up. It looks pretty normal. But if you open up these folders, all of a sudden you get like a trillion billion tracks. Now, this obviously would become a problem, because if I open up folder after folder, I mean, you start to see just scrolling through this is a nightmare. And that would become a problem as I start activating tracks and using them. Just getting around my session would be an absolute nightmare. So how do I get around that? Well, that comes into the first kind of key workflow aspect of my template. And that is this macro that I built. So in Cubase, there's this thing called the Project Logical Editor. And I have this thing called Hide All Disabled. And so basically you can build these like logic gates and then trigger them with a key command, which I'll show you in a second. So for me, we're looking for a property where the property is that the track is disabled. And once I select that and I do this action, what I want it to do is hide the track or show the track, which means just toggle. So if I go into my key commands, I've taken that hide all disabled, and I've assigned it here to number 5. All right, so what that means is that we have all these disabled tracks, right? Currently, basically everything except this piano is disabled. If I hit 5, they just go away. If I want to see them again, I hit 5, they show up. If I enable a track, like let's enable this felt piano, I click D to enable or disable, and then I hit 5. It hides everything except that track I've enabled. So now you can start to see how I might build out my template for the specific session I'm in. I'll go through, I'll find 3 or 4 tracks that I want. I hit D, which activates them, and then they load. I close, and I just have the stuff that I'm using on that specific project. And then if I end up not wanting it and I want to get rid of it, I can deactivate them. I can go to visibility and hide them. There's a lot of different things that I can do. But the reason that I have my template set up this way is when I was thinking about how to save myself time in projects, The main thing I was spending time doing was opening up an instance of Contact or whatever library engine, going through, finding the library I want, loading in the library, finding the patch I want, loading in the patch, figuring out the settings I want, making the settings, and that was just taking me so much time. I would literally spend, before I would start writing a cue, sometimes upwards of an hour just getting all the sounds I want into the session. And so I thought when I was making a template, I basically never ever want to open up Contact and menu dive ever again. I just want everything I could ever need accessible. And the other cool thing about doing it this way is I don't have to have all these up and then scroll through them. They can even be hidden and I can still search them. So it's like, all right, I want Cinematic Studio Strings violin. So I go CSS, there's all my Cinematic Studio Strings, there's violin 1, boom. I click on it, it opens up, I hit D, and it loads. And there we go. I got a violin, and I can start writing immediately. It's set up the way that I like it set up with the mic choices that I like and everything's exactly as it should be. That is the case for every single library that I own and every single patch from that library that I find useful. So when I get a library, I go through, and I've talked about this in videos before, I go through and I literally listen to every single patch and I load in everything that I conceivably think that I could use. So like, let's take a synth library. Like what if we want to locate, there's this synth library I've been using a ton lately, which is called Anamorph by Teletone Audio. So here's all my Anamorph tracks. So like, you know, I might just select them all, activate them all, and then boom, and then I would go through and I would just start playing them and listening to them, and that would basically how I would pick the patches from that library, and the ones that I don't want, I can just disable again, you know, and then by the time I'm done, I have maybe 3 or 4 that are still enabled, and I hit 5 again, and everything else goes away, and just the ones that I have enabled are there. So this is really, really useful to me because it eliminated a massive like time suck in my workflow, which was the main reason I wanted to build a template. So that sort of explains why my template has 2,954 tracks, and how I sort of deal with that just logistically in making things visually not super cluttered. But let's talk a little bit now about how I've sort of formatted or organized this. As you can see, I have really loose groups here. So I have miscellaneous, which is like I put guitars in there. Let's see. I think my pianos are all in here, like keys. There's some electric bass, blues, harmonica, banjo, you know, things like that that don't really fall into other categories. And I've been pretty broad intentionally with that. I have synths, which is probably my biggest folder in that, you know, it's pads, arps, drones, everything. I have woodwinds, which is what you'd expect, you know, flute, clarinet, all that stuff. I have brass, strings, choir, which is all vocals. I have pitched percussion, which is percussion instruments that have pitch, like harps, vibraphones, marimbas, crotales, timpani, that sort of thing. And then I have percussion, and this includes synthetic percussion, orchestral percussion, drum sets, you know, all of that. And these are intentionally broad. On a project-to-project basis, I might get more specific with how I do my busing, but basically everything within each of these folders goes to a corresponding bus. And not just that, it actually also has effects sends sometimes that go to corresponding buses. So like if I open up this East-West violin, if you look on the channel strip for that, I have, right here, it's going to strings, effects, reverb hall, which is just my main reverb hall. You'll also notice I don't have a lot of effects. Some tracks do, but I didn't want to treat this template like it was a mix template. I wanted to leave things like super untweaked. Some things, again, I do have more effects on than others. But like this, like when it comes to a string sound, I'm going to change that from project to project. So I have it going to a reverb hall, and that's it. And then if we go find that reverb hall that's in my effects channels folder, that is sent to the string bus as well. So basically, if it has STR in front of it, it's going to the string bus, which includes these effect sends. So what that means is that if I bounce out my string bus, which is right here, that's going to contain all of the dry string tracks as well as the reverb sends for strings. Now, some people will get a lot more involved with this, and they'll do like short strings, long strings, high strings, low strings. And the reason that they're doing that is because they're sending those buses to their mixers and they're mixing from those buses. My mixing engineers at Supersauce Audio are sociopaths, and they want every individual track, so I don't really have to set up my template that way. So instead of getting like a strings high, strings low, strings long, strings short, I'm literally sending them east-west violin 1 legato, east-west violin 1 staccato, Cinemax Studio strings cello legato. Like, they're getting sometimes upwards of like 100 tracks or more from a given session in their to mix directly. They just like to have that control. So I don't have to do that kind of busing. Sometimes in certain workflows where I have to do that for one reason or another, it's really easy for me to just like duplicate this string bus, call one string high, string low, just reassign within the session and build from there. And that was really important to me to like, I have things set up this way, but it's not hard and fast. Like, I can change things and make them work for any given project. So I wanted it to be specific enough that I wasn't wasting time, but broad enough that I can change things if I need to. Okay, let's talk about some of the non-virtual instruments things that are in my template. So if I open up my audio connections, you can see all these buses that I have and that I've made, and these are all very, very specific. So if I open up, like, say, my synths folder, we see here some of the things at the top are like, let's just take like here, this Juno 60, there's a MIDI track and then there's an audio track. And the way that this is set up is, if you look right here, I have this M Audio MIDI Sport thing. This can send out discrete MIDI channels. So if you look at my available MIDI channels here, there's all these MIDI Sport things, and then this one actually is for Juno has its own MIDI send that is this little guy here that I got off of Reverb, which is awesome. And basically it sends a USB out, goes into this certain connector on the back of the Juno, and will allow me to send MIDI from the track here to my Juno. So I don't have to sit and always play the Juno. I can actually send MIDI from my session to the Juno. And then in my audio track, I have that connected to the preamps that I most like to use with the Juno. And I have my Juno outs on my patch bay here so that I can connect them to any pre's I want. But they just default to the pre's that I like the most. But then I can always just go in and change that. And I have that set up for all of my synths. So like the Monologue, the Model D, the Juno, I can take out of the discrete MIDI channels that I have within my template, and I can send it to these synths and then just choose what pre's I want to record them, and they all have audio tracks that I can enable and send, and it works. And that work that I did to prepare that and to actually put that in the template makes it so much easier to do things like use analog synths, because the tracks are already there. The MIDI is already routed the way I need it to be routed. So literally, if I just open up Total Mix, I pick the preamps that I want to listen to, I click on the MIDI file for that synth, I turn the synth on, I start playing my actual MIDI keyboard, it sends the MIDI to the synth, I can hear it through Total Mix, and everything is perfect. So that type of integration and just always on kind of philosophy has really saved me an unbelievable amount of time in my projects, and also just made me more willing to actually use the outboard stuff, which I think is really inspiring and I always want to use, but when it takes a bunch of work, it's just really hard to justify. So that's kind of how I've integrated the synths. In terms of how I have set up my preamps, I have a number of pre's. I don't have the most of anyone ever, but this is a Tascam console that I have. my first 4 channels are set up as microphone inputs. The next 4 are set up as line inputs. So, if I want to go bass directly into the Tascam, this is channel 5, which is patch 37. So I literally just find 37 and I can plug the bass directly into that, and that takes it into channel 5 of the Tascam. Or if I want to, on my top of my patch bay, 9 through 16 are line outs from Cubase, so I can route stuff out of Cubase through the Ferrofish and then like patch into the Tascam, and that will actually allow me to run audio through the Tascam. Or I could patch it into this Eventide Space reverb pedal that I have, or this JHS color box, or this tube pre, or whatever. I could even take it out of there. I could go into the internal input or external input of the MS-10 and run it through the filter, and then I could take the output of the MS-10 and plug that into a preamp. Basically, like, everything is connectable through this patch bay hub. And when I take anything from the patch bay, I could put it into anything else. And it's all set up in Cubase and all made really available and easy for me to just pull in to the session and use. And that has just enabled me to do a lot very quickly. This extends throughout the room too. So like I have a room mic here that's kind of my like go-to if I'm gonna record acoustic guitar or any sort of acoustic instrument. That's sort of always set up. I have guitar amps that have microphones that are all set up in the room and patchable. All those microphones are patchable, so I could take that SM57 and patch it into any preamp. I have like ribbon mics that are always set up on the acoustic piano. Those are also patchable. I've got headphones that run back here, and then I just use Cubase IC on my iPhone right there, and I can run the session from my iPhone and just record back here. Like the electric piano is all plugged in. This 1/4 inch runs all the way around the room into the patch bay, and the patch bay I can then plug it into, like I said before, absolutely anything. So everything in the room is connected and ready to go, and everything in the template is connected and ready to go. So I can send anything into anything and be totally solid, and yeah, it just all works. So that's a very fast overview, but it's the most thorough one I've done to show kind of how I've set up the template, and I guess also in extension the studio. But the Cubase template really is the hub for everything, and so it's important to me that it's set up very thoroughly, very broadly, but also very efficiently. So hopefully that was interesting to you. If you have more questions about how I set that up, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear about how you set up your templates. So if you have a unique way of doing it, also leave that in the comments. If you found this useful or interesting, give me a thumbs up. Lots more content coming like this on the channel. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.